esteemed guest. We love having him. I know he's interesting. Keeps us all tuned up. So let's just take a deep breath. Breathe into our heart space. Find some calm, settling. Open our ears, our hearts to new information, to interesting information. We are so grateful today for each of you here, and especially for Paul, being here and gracing us with his knowledge. We thank you, sweet Spirit, and know that you are with us all of the time. In the name of the Spirit, we say amen.
Amen.
Okay, Paul.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you all for coming. It's a delight to be here. We're going to get into some fascinating information as soon as we can get everybody in here and get the door closed.
Well, it looks like such a simple thing.
I
don't know.
That's neat.
Thank you.
I'm sure there's a lesson in that.
Last week, we were talking about the whole question of why the Romans would resort to a goddess in a very far distant country to deal with the problem they were facing, which was the question of Hannibal invading Rome. And this, of course, is one of the great watershed moments in history, and therefore it's really important that we talk about it. Carolyn, maybe you can fix that.
Yeah, we're gonna move down.
Yeah. All right.
Oh, I see.
Turns out that cord is not plugged into anything. It goes around to the men's room, but it's plugged into a different place.
All right. And so we got into the question last week of why then are the Romans, why would they call on somebody by the name of Cybele to save them from this great invasion that was going on? And of course, this is a marvelous question. And by the way, last time you asked a great question about the Roman legion. The Roman legion. And so I wanted to clarify this for you. You asked how many are in a Roman legion? The answer is it's supposed to be, never was, of course, but a legion is 5,000 men. In cohorts a cohort is a part of a legion. So there would be 10 cohorts. One of them would be in double size. So you get around 5,000 out of this. Now 5,000, this is a huge number, of course, because just the logistics, the problems of moving 5,000 men. Now when the Romans entered into this conflict with the Jews around 70 AD, that conflict was very traumatic for them, because here was a small nation, two tribes, Judah and Benjamin, who were taking on the Roman military. So they decided to teach the Jews a lesson. And the Jews, of course, they sent in 12 legions, 60,000 men. And even then, it still took them almost 2 years to put down this rebellion by this little pipsqueak of a country, right? Now, the Romans, they had to have, their authority could never be challenged. And so they were willing to expend whatever it took. And so But can you imagine moving 60,000 men? Now, today with modern technology, during World War I, Pershing moved 1 million men, and he would have moved up to 2 million men, but they had railroads, right? They had huge ships and so on. What do the Romans have? Small, relatively small ships, carry a few hundred men, and yet they have to move 20,000. They had to move 5,000 per legion, and on this particular occasion, they moved 60,000 men. It's astonishing, really. It's amazing. And if you go to Israel, you can still see the campsites. Because of the climate and the desert, the campsites are still there. Massive, massive campsites. Amazing. All right, now I want to get back to the question. So, why would the Romans take such an interest in having with them this goddess named Cybele? And Cybele, of course, not only was a goddess, a mother goddess of that region, of what is today Turkey, in an area called Mount Ida. So at the base of Mount Ida was the place of Cybele. It's where she supposedly lived. And so the question is, why would this matter to the Romans? And the answer is, of course, that I explained, took a long time last week to explain, that the Romans saw themselves as Troy, as continuation of Troy, and they would consider themselves Trojan, because Mount Ida is the mountain or in the region called Troas. And Troas. So, in other words, this was their original mother goddess. And mother goddesses were very, very important back in those days. And so, Cybele then is brought to Rome in the form of a meteorite, and the Romans, of course, build this palace for her, build this temple for her on the Palatine Hill, the Palatine, which is where we get the word palace, the Palatine Hill, and they started worshiping her. And lo and behold, Hannibal stops. There's no army stopping him, but he stops. He does not invade Rome, and he wins this great victory in southern Italy. The Cannae. This was just a total wipeout. He'd already defeated. Had major, he'd already had 2 major conflicts with the Romans, and legions were wiped out, and then the Cannae. This was a total disaster. So there was nothing preventing Hannibal from coming into Rome, and yet he did it. And then, so what the Romans did, under this general named Scipio. Now Scipio is really important in our story. General Scipio has a plan. He says, if I take the legions and we attack Carthage, this will force Hannibal to come back. Smart, right?
No.
So he takes the legions over to Carthage, and Hannibal brings all of his army back, and then they fight at a place called Zama. And they're in 202 BC. Hannibal had a much bigger army. He was the great tactician, strategist, brilliant. Yet somehow, and Scipio almost lost, but the native cavalry came in and helped Scipio, and somehow Scipio defeated Hannibal. Now, this is not the end of Hannibal. I mean, his whole army destroyed, and yet he walks off the field, and they spend many more years tracking him down. But he no longer has an army. Now, this is called, there's a series of these. This is the most famous, the Punic Wars. The Punic Wars then are the struggle between Rome and Carthage. The Carthaginians are Phoenicians. They had come from Phoenicia and settled this North African area, and they were very powerful. And so they're destroyed, and they rise up once more. And this time, when the Romans come in, they bring salt. They bring shiploads full of salt, and salt Carthage, so nothing will grow there. Nothing can be built there. Just make it a desert, a wasteland. And so North Africa was never very important after this, because the Punic War then shifted the center of power to Rome. And Rome now, about 200 years before the time of Jesus, becomes the center of the world, at least the Western world. And this is very important. Now, one of the reasons I want to talk about Cybele and tell you her story, they called her, by the way, MDM. And you'll see this in Roman writing. You'll just see MDM. It stands for Mater Deum Magnum. Mother, God, raised. Magnum. You know, you get a magnum at the wine, that's the largest bottle, right? In other words, the biggest, the greatest, the most important. In fact, one of the most important Roman holidays became the celebration of Cybele. It's called the Meg Galesia. This is always in early April. The mega. See, we still have that word in English, right? Mega. The big, right? Lesia means festival. The Megalesia. And this is a very important Roman holiday and celebration. And so the story of bringing this particular religion to Rome is a very important story, because it shows you that the Romans were willing to bring in other gods and deities into the religion. Now, we call these today, mystery religion. Mystery Now, this isn't a very good name. Mystery religions. The reason they're called mystery religions is because they had to keep, these people had to keep everything secretive, because they were, from time to time, persecuted these various religions. Of these various religions, the one that came in and proved to be enormously popular was then this religion we call the Great Mother Cult. So, Great Mother Cult. Now, the Great Mother Cult, this is the cult of Cybele, and I just want to tell you briefly the story. And her son, Attis. Now, if there's a stranger story in religion than this, I'd like to hear it. Here it goes. So, Cybele is obviously a princess royalty. Now, this is hard for our brains to hammer this into us. But in the ancient world, royalty and divinity are very, very close related. In various places, there is no difference. In other words, if you're a pharaoh in Egypt, you are God. You're the human incarnation of God on earth, you see. And this is a little bit hard. You get all the way down. You get all the way down to Napoleon before you start, and the Enlightenment, before you start to get a disconnect between religion and government. And it happened this way. So it's time for Napoleon to be crowned emperor of France. All right? So who does the crowning? The Pope. The Pope. You know, we go all the way back in European history. You start with Charlemagne, 800. Charlemagne is crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope, right? And so all the kings and royalties of Europe, basically from 800 down to 1800, Napoleon, 1,000 years, who's doing the crowning? The Pope or someone appointed by the Pope to do it, right? This is